Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel Hubbard, Hillary Kay, and I are launching this new season on patterns. So some of our seasons have gone super deep, and when we were talking about attachment style and overlaying with instincts and all this stuff, it can get pretty complicated. And so this season is going to be a back to basics kind of a season. This is going to be a great season to introduce people to the Enneagram. This is going to be a great season to send your friends and have them listen to some of the panels, because what we're doing in this season comes out of a message that came through on Instagram, where we talk about the heart of the Enneagram being based on core motivation, why people do what they do, and then the patterns or the strategies they use in order to meet those needs of the type. And so someone wrote on Instagram, you guys talk about the core motivation and the patterns a lot. What are those? And so that launched this whole season where we said, okay, the Enneagram is supposed to be based on self-reporting, and we will always come back to that. We need to hear from the types more than us teaching you about the type. We need to hear from those individuals, which is why we started panels in the first place. And so we're going to bring these panels together, and we're going to ask them about their core motivation and how they would name it, and also the patterns and strategies they use to meet the needs of that core motivation, and what they did when it didn't quite work out. But before we launch into that season, Joel, Hillary, and I wanted to get around the mics and have a conversation about this. And so we did. The hub of all of our work is www.theartofgrowth.org. If you do not know your type or your instinctual stack, you can take free tests that are on our website there. And that's the place to reach out to us for coaching, or if you'd like to bring us into your organization, because the Enneagram has become the #1 psychometric tool used for businesses over the last few years for good reason. And we have been doing a lot of work in that space, and we love it. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode.
So we're talking about, well, the reason why we're doing this, let's start with that. One of our been on a previous podcast, one of our followers said, hey, you guys talk a lot about core motivation and then the pattern. Mm-hmm. Could you say more about that? Like, how does that show up for each type? What is the pattern? What does that mean? And it's not the first time we've been asked that question.
But this time when you were asked that question, you're like, I'm going to launch an entire panel season based on that one question. And sometimes that does happen. I love it.
Yeah. And spoiler, is that a pattern of the 7?
Well, F you, Hillary.
For being so on the money.
Yeah.
Well done. And it launched the whole season. So this will be coming. This is next.
And I'm loving it. And
so good.
It seems like the panelists are loving it, and they're going deep into them. And someone said, is that a sort of like a back to basics? And that's a great question. I thought, yeah, in some sense it is. But in another sense, it's not, because the whole idea of the sort of core motivation and then the strategy is really we're teasing out two very different things that sometimes gets confused together. And people don't understand the difference between what is the sort of core driver and then what are the patterns or strategies that my type developed at an early age as a means to not feeling the sort of pain that I am missing something, that something's not quite right, that I am not complete, that there's something I'm trying to get as a type. So,
for example,
you could take let's take a type 2. Type 2 has the core need for feeling loved, connected, wanted. And so how do they go about meeting that need?
Yeah.
It doesn't start out, I don't believe, from a place of how do I achieve love because I'm drawn to it. It's more of like I don't know that I'm wanted. Oftentimes that is sort of what begins there. Now, more supportive families, I've heard from plenty of 2s who have said, my parents were wonderful, very supportive, very loving. So I don't have a particular moment where I felt unloved. And yet the pattern still shows up, which the pattern is there to say, well, I don't want to ever not feel loved or wanted, right. So
But to not confuse
I go
the
by that.
strategy with the pattern, this is where we want to distinguish this really up front. And a 2, for example, because some people do say, well, the core thing for a 2 is they need to be helpful and they need to like create a connection to solve that. No. The helping is a strategy to get the need met.
The core need met. Correct.
Yes.
That's the difference between the strategy and the core motivation.
Yeah. I think a couple examples of types where it's like this. Some people think it's this.
Yeah.
That this is what they need. It's like no, that's the strategy to getting that need met.
Yeah, exactly. Like even like as a 6, what's my core need? Oh, to be supported. Well, partly that's close. Sometimes there's a real closeness between the core motivation and the strategy, but still support is a means to an end. It's like I support as a means to not feeling alone in my fear, which I think is really more the core for the 6s. It's the sense of like, and we've been field testing this with tons of 6s, and what we're getting over and over again is a sense, this like, actually, you're right. It's the aloneness in my fear that's actually worse than the fear itself. And so what do I do about that? Well, I go about seeking, support. It's also the gift that they're very good at giving. And I think the pattern, that's why we're saying the pattern's neutral too. That's the thing. That's the other thing we're saying is like, it's both the core motivation's neutral and so is the pattern neutral. But what I'm realizing is how quickly we go from, as children go from, there's a core need to then the need turns in on itself. And it becomes, there's something wrong with me, right? So like, I'm actually alone in my fear as a 6. Nobody's with me in this space. That sense of abandonment in that way shows up for the 6, rather than, oh no, there are threats in the world. And I'm pretty good at picking those up. And then people do tend to feel sometimes quite alone in their struggles. And I'm really good at coming alongside and helping people feel supported.
Do you think that there is a difference between a pattern and a feature? Because
say more about that.
I use this example all the time with teams that we train is like you can have 3 different people in the room that say they're detail oriented.
Yeah.
Right?
We always get that. Yeah.
That's a feature.
Yeah.
That is not a pattern for some people. Right? Or it's not.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's just like, oh yeah, I'm detail oriented, but they're not detail oriented to get their motivation met.
Yeah.
To where there's other people who are detail oriented as a pattern to get their motivation met.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm tracking with you. Yes, this makes a lot of sense to me. So because I think this is where a lot of times even confusion and types come up and people are like, well, I think I'm this type because of this feature. And I'm like, well, but I haven't discovered yet. I would have to ask some questions to know if that feature is it's just a strategy you picked up on the way because it helps you accomplish what you want to see done in the world and the things that are in front of you, or have you established that and you hold on to that because it's helping you meet a core need? Yeah, for sure.
Let's explore this. And so I'm going to take a different angle.
Okay.
I'm going to say that it does. I'm going to say that every feature serves the core motivation. I'm not convinced of this myself.
But the same feature could show up
that.
in multiple different types.
Yeah.
I think this is her point. A feature could show up in multiple different types. They might all be using it to meet their core motivation in different ways.
Yeah.
There's certain things you can't directly attach the feature to a particular type because that feature could show up in a different type for a different reason. And we've talked about this before, about people will use even similar strategies from time to meet a different need.
Right. But I think Hillary, you're saying, is there a difference between sort of the feature and the pattern?
So yeah, like I'm thinking like using detail-oriented. Well, sometimes you have to be detail-oriented in like a job, for instance. And if you're not, then there's consequences to that, right? But some people, regardless if that job requires them to be detail-oriented, they are detail-oriented because that is their pattern.
I get you. And I think that that's really good because I think there are things like cultural overlays we've talked about, right? Right, where we've met people who, different countries, we've typed companies with teams in different countries, and they will have that overlay of that country. And they will say, well, imagine growing up here and being told all the time that if you get an A-, I literally had this happen last week. So it was really cool. Like, I grew up in a world where if I got an A-, the thing wasn't like, oh, well done, you got an A-. It was, why didn't you get an A+? And so he said that cultural overlay is strong in me. Turned out to be a different type than the type you might have assumed based on that, like, the hard charging, achieving, wanting to get that top grade. But that's a different, so to your point, I think that's true. There are things we pick up on that don't necessarily serve our core motivation. But in some sense, there's a loose connection to it where we can make like, oh, but in order for you to feel loved in your home and to feel connected as a two, you picked up on some perfectionistic tendencies as a means to
because that caregiver wanted that.
Yeah, not feeling unloved by your caregiver. And so it gets bent into it's like I'm moving that into this space in order to serve, because the core need is sort of the core driver of your existence. It's like you can't even imagine not having that. So that's why I'm saying I'm not sure that there are features that would not be somehow converted in some way to meet that core need.
Yeah, so we're throwing out a lot of terminology here, like core need, feature, pattern. So if the core need is the type, every single type has a core need that they are trying to fulfill, and they will adapt different strategies to meet those needs. How would you define how you're using the word pattern here?
Well, so I use the two words interchangeably, pattern and strategy, because in some sense, strategy feels too planned and too, you can imagine a 5-year-old saying, well, I'm going to sit down and design up a strategy for how not to feel this feeling. Of course, that doesn't happen that way, right?
Yeah.
So there's a sense at which some people won't relate to strategy necessarily as the way that they would imagine it. Pattern might feel more like, oh yeah, I recognize this sort of behavioral series of behaviors that tend to repeat themselves as a means for me not to feel this pain of not being loved, not being wanted, not being special, not being strong, not being peaceful, and so on.
Yeah, it's like the pattern is part of the person's, like the personal evolution. They're not doing it intentionally like you would a strategy. Right. But like the pattern is like this, like the coping. Yeah. It's like I am adapting to what my environment needs of me. Like it's like, animals somehow eventually grew feathers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were protected, it protected them from something. And like I think that's what we do as well. Yeah. Is like we evolve, right, based on, and develop our patterns. And
Yeah. Let me see if I can break this down as simple as possible for here. So let's take a strategy like being helpful. Like I want to be helpful to others, and I'm a very helpful person. I really care about helping other people. So someone might hear that and think, oh, they're a 2. But a 3 might be helping people because then they're going to gain that admiration or respect. A 4 might be helping people because it feels like they're doing something significant for someone else. A 5 might be helpful because they're getting to be a resource to someone else. A 6 might be helpful because they're giving the kind of support and makes someone else feel safe in that place. A 7 might be helpful because this person will have a more optimal future. An 8 might be helpful because it's an empowering part to make this person. A 9 might be helpful because if I help in this situation, it's going to keep the peace. And a 1 might be helpful because I'm good. A good person should help other people too. It's the ethical thing to do. So I'm taking that feature and I went all the way around and say, like, you're doing it for different reasons.
Yeah.
That went pretty quick. I'm proud of that. Okay. All right. Carry on.
Yeah. We did that.
I'm trying to make this as accessible as possible to distinguish. You're using these strategies to meet different core needs.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that. I mean, I like what you also said in terms of evolution and how that comes as a result of sometimes of your environment as well. Like there is no 2 types that have the exact same pattern for meeting their similar core need. This is what I've loved so far as we've talked to different panels is I actually asked them, so I'm super excited about this series. I'm asking them, you tell me what your core motivation is. So you know what's written in the material, you've already been exposed to that, so it's helpful to have that. But now you tell me, how would you language it? And they language it differently. Because what we're trying to get at is not a stereotype or a box. It's more of like this energy at the core of all of us, and we're trying to name it. And so we're going to name it similarly, which is what brings types together. and distinguishes them from other types. But they're gonna say it slightly different for each of them, and it's been beautiful so far as we've been talking to some of these panelists. Yeah, my Enneagram teacher, the great Helen Palmer, amazing teacher. She would use the word attention, and I loved that because it's like it's not just the attention of the mind. She would say it's like an attentional energy. It's like, where is it going in your type? And it takes some work to look at that, because you can say, well, I'm not safety oriented as a 6. I don't think I'm thinking about physical safety. It's like, okay, but do you notice a sort of hypervigilance, an attention that goes towards the potential threats that exist in the world and what could go wrong? And they'll start to, yeah, that's very much what I'm doing. Yeah. But I'm not concerned about physical safety, Joel. I don't prepare anything. I don't even look for safety, for exits and all that other stuff that people say about 6s. I don't do that. I don't do any of that. I walk into a building and I'm like, whatever. I don't even know where the exits are. But the attention goes elsewhere. Yes, I am scanning. I'm still looking around because I'm looking for threats maybe in a different realm, like the way people interact with each other or with me. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good thing to look at, is how the different types will have a slightly different pattern, but the pattern at the larger level will tend to be the same. Like I am looking, as a 6, for example, I'm looking for the threats, and I'm developing in my mind contingency plans so that I'm prepared. It's like having a tool belt full of tools that I'm walking around with at all times, just in case. So I'm ready, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm swapping out the tools depending upon the situation, because situations change. So I might need a different tool. And that's a general kind of feel to that would be more of the pattern. And then when we get down to the specifics of the different 6s, well, then that'll start to shape out very differently.
Yeah.
Let's look a little bit more at what the pattern is there to do and how it starts to not work at a certain point. Maybe we can talk about our own experiences around that. So let me set it up by saying the pattern is there, once again, to protect us from the pain of not having something. I'm convinced of that. It's much more than it is I'm trying to achieve the thing that is the high side of my core need. So for example, if we take a type 1's core need to be good, to have integrity, to feel like they are a moral person doing the right thing, is the pattern there initially to actually achieve that? Or is it more to deal with the sense that maybe I'm not? Maybe I'm defective in some sense. Maybe I don't have integrity. And so that's where the pattern or the strategy starts to try to deal with that particular feeling, that sense. And it's protective, right? But it also prevents the type from getting what they're there to get as a type 1. So, which is like that sense of feeling good, that sense of achieving and creating something that is not only near perfect, but also really, really genuinely good, like beautiful good. And so what happens early on in life is it's there to protect you, and then it starts to create problems at some point in your life. So setting it up that way, where do you see that having shown up in your lives?
I think it showed up really early on because as an 8 in the environment I was in with the family I was in, the cultural overlays were resistant to the natural wanting to step up and just take charge and lead whatever was going on and have a sense of agency, my own sense of agenda of I wanted to do certain things in certain ways. And it was resisted early on. So I think I started having to have adaptation strategies pretty early on, whether that was to be really heady and make arguments and have conversations and be able to articulate things well. It came out on my desire to then be on stage because that was a position of authority. It was a place where you were somebody if you were up there. So I was on the adult worship team of the 5,000 person church at 15 years old. trying to be a part of this thing with all these adults and like trying to stand with them. It was a way to like gain agency. But so much of the way my personality was actually experienced in that, I met a lot of resistance. I had leaders who told me later, I didn't trust you because I didn't think I could control you. And I felt that resistance all the time. And I was constantly going, what am I not doing right? So I think it was like this need for agency and agenda to do a thing that I wanted to do and to like assert myself into the world to do it, but then get met with resistance at every point in time. So I had to like try and find other strategies that
and
would
do it
work.
with people. It wasn't just like do it solo for you.
Absolutely.
It was with a group of people as a social aid.
Yeah, because there had to be a setting in order to do that. There needed to be an outlet, because if this was the world that I was living in, and I was in that world a lot, outside of school, like that was dominant. Even the school I was in at the time, before I got thrown out, was that kind of environment. So I had to try to have a sense of belonging in that environment as me. And I think that's like the little triangle that we're trying to work out. It's like yourself in this environment, and you're trying to like be who you are, and you're trying to connect those three things together. And it's
Oh my gosh, that's
really
yeah.
complicated. I think that's one of the hardest things about growing up in general, is because you're trying to marry these three things together, that you're constantly being told, well, not like that. Well, do this, or well, you shouldn't be like that. And then the no's teach you to create new patterns. So yeah, that's
a good point, because if you're met with resistance around your normal pattern, you have to adapt and create a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know other people where the environment it doubled down on the pattern that was already there. So if you're be good and you're in a very like conservative environment, like it doubles down, and then you're like, I'm a rock star in this place because
but also like a prisoner to it.
Yeah.
Many of them describe it afterwards. It's like, yes, it doubled down on my type, but then as a result, it's like I couldn't get out of that. I couldn't, like it became oppressive to my own system. And I think you've had some experiences like that as a 3, right?
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in a very loud, performative, large family. Everyone, I mean, I only have one sibling, but both sides of like my mom's side and my dad's family, lots of siblings. And we were raised in evangelical, charismatic church, and everyone, it's loud. It's performative. It's everyone is competing for attention. And
that's what it felt like.
It felt like for me. Yeah. And so my pattern then, I started to learn how to perform. And I realized, when you perform,
you stand out.
You stand out. And then people recognize you in this sea of people, and you're the best. And people then come to see you in the show. You get fed by, I only come to this church when there's a children's performance to watch you.
Oh, boy.
And then that makes my parents look good, which then makes my grandparents look good. Then, right? And so it was like, it was a very learned behavior. And then,
So it feeds your pattern.
Right. But when I went to other environments that weren't my family, that weren't my church, and I did that same performance, and I wanted everyone's approval. Looking for everyone's approval and needing that affirmation. I was so over the top of needing it that on one hand, then it like went in the opposite direction. People were actually annoyed by me, would give me negative feedback. Like, you don't have to always be the one to raise your hand. You don't have to be always the one to be the first one done with your test. You don't always have to be the one. Like, and it got turned around on me with that in that regard. And then also because I felt like I needed to impress everybody. I needed to be the best for everybody. I needed everybody to like me, admire me, like see me as this massive success. I would then try to do that from people that I shouldn't do it with, right? Like the people that turned into maybe some bad influences on me that I adapted myself so much. That's where my adaptability pattern came, is I adapted myself so much to like maybe this group or this group over here that I lost who I was.
Right.
And I didn't know who I was. And then I ended up like in this really like strange place in my life. And that was a pattern in the different sense of pattern that repeated for me.
So, because you were constantly having to go into different environments and say, well, what are the rules here? Like, how do I do it here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the pattern. That's the pattern of the 3.
100%. And then I find those rules and I adapt to those rules.
Yeah.
And then I figure out, how can I do that faster?
Faster, more efficiently.
More
than
efficiently.
What the system,
Yep. And then I get the, oh my gosh, you did that so quick. Oh my gosh, you're so productive.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. That feeds the beast.
It feeds the beast.
For you, your awareness of the pattern not working came on early, which is a gift. Not everybody has that happen early on in life, because it's a series for all of us. It's not like there's one thing. But what are some memories of like, that's when the first awarenesses started coming, and then some changes, maybe some small changes in the pattern began taking place for you? Yeah,
there was a time in high school that I remember, because I don't think I had an awareness. I think I can, in hindsight, see it. But I think one of the first, it's going to sound silly probably to some people, but it was a really traumatic thing for me. I had my mom tell me one time with like me, dating or making friends. And she said, you know what, Hillary, you don't even know what kind of eggs you like. You just like whatever eggs the person you are with likes.
That's from Runaway Bride.
It is.
It is. Okay.
It is.
That's where she got that? Okay.
Yeah. And in that moment, I felt naked.
Ooh,
like
exposed.
So exposed.
Yeah, awful feeling. Yeah.
Like, no, I do, but I do really like this over here. And I did really like that over there.
Was that true?
And that's when I got into this like crisis, like this internal crisis of I don't know who I am.
Okay.
And that was when I really first remember going, and then I started catching myself do it. And that was when I started getting like, just disgusted with that behavior.
So never in this did you go, the adaptability is a strength. The fact that I can like different things on different days, that never... Okay.
Well, because, it's interesting. So I love this because I'm thinking this could turn into another thing that we do. But anyways.
There you are, Stephaning again, Joel.
Of course you are.
You move into the awareness first. But it doesn't mean that you're going to change. Because this is what I find fascinating. That's why I'm saying this is coming to me as we're talking about this. It's like, but how many people we have encountered, including ourselves, where the change doesn't take place just because you're aware, like I'm adapting. You're right. I don't know what kind of eggs I really like. So what happens is we might double down actually on our type, or we might figure out another way. Like, now I need to adapt to being more of a person of integrity. So how do I do that? It's more of the type 100%. Trying to fix it.
How do I perform that? How do I perform being more?
Yeah, and I absolutely did, because there was a time where like, no, this is what I want. And then even if I realized I didn't like it, once I was in it, I was like, well, crap. This is what I said I wanted, so I have to stick to this now.
Yeah.
And perform my way through it.
Okay, so this is huge, because I think that's the step in between sometimes. That's not, because the awareness brings you to, okay, I see what I'm doing, and wow, I feel exposed, and I don't like this. So now what do I do? And oftentimes we use our type to actually try to solve our type, right? And the same, what was it, Einstein's quote, same consciousness that created the problem cannot solve the problem. But we try. Jim, was there a moment for you? I mean, you shared a little bit, but was there a moment for you when you're like, okay, now I have awareness that my pattern isn't exactly working because I'm being told I can't control you, so I don't trust you?
A couple times a day for the last 35 years, at least. Yeah.
What did you do? What did you do when it first came on? Was it more of like you're all wrong?
I would go back and forth. I would go back and forth between the what's wrong with me and what's wrong with them.
Okay.
So I would just vacillate between those two questions. Because sometimes it was really like, what's wrong with me? Especially when it came to peers. It was what's wrong with me. When it came to authority figures, it's like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, I can see that.
Interesting.
That makes sense to me.
It went more that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just kind of like, if you're an authority figure, you have lost, I need to take you down. So I'm going to combat against you. But if it was my peers, it was just kind of like, oh no. Yeah. And then I felt really like embarrassed, and I'd want to figure out how to like navigate and be cooler. So I would watch the funny kids. Mm-hmm. And I remember just studying them. Like I remember one day sitting on a bus, and there's the kid who gets on who's always entertaining, always making everyone laugh, and just like just watching. I probably looked like a stalker. I'm like just zeroed in watching everything he did, because I was like, I'm going to figure out how to run the room like that.
Yeah.
With the peers.
Yeah.
But yeah, with authority figures, it was a big middle finger. Yeah. And you're an idiot, you know?
Yeah. So again, there's like an awareness that this is not exactly working, this pattern, but not, okay, now I know how to.
But I don't know what to do with it.
I don't know what to do with it.
I think that's the whole thing is when you're confronted and you say, well, you didn't change right away, and you double down. Well, like what other
choice? You have no other choice.
I didn't see another option.
Right.
It took a long time till I started seeing like, well, they're handling this situation okay, and people are responding to them well in this situation. Maybe I can try that strategy. Because at first I couldn't even see that. I think when you first realize your pattern isn't working, it's such a jarring experience.
Oh my gosh.
It's so painful that it's very disorienting. It's like, I don't even know what universe I'm in right now. And the pain of that, it doesn't make you go, well, I need to grow and change. It makes you just be like, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a huge, I'm so glad you said that. There's such a reaction internally for us. I mean, whatever that reaction is for all 9 types is going to be different, but it is visceral, and it is painful, and it is extreme. It's not this small kind of like, oh, okay. Like, and I think it's protective, and it's natural. Because again, our patterns are protective structures. So,
well, okay. What about you?
So mine came also, my awarenesses came early on, probably around 7 or 8 years old. Yeah, real early. Because I do remember being an entertainer at the house. Like, I still remember this. There was only 3 of us, 3 kids at the time. And, my parents, we all had dinner every night. We had dinner at the same time together. That's the kind of very routine, very self-preservation kind of environment. And I'm not that dude at all. So, I was the wild card out of the 3 children. And I used my love of laughter and play and humor to just be an idiot. And I would be an idiot at the table, at the dinner table. And I knew if I got my mom laughing, my dad didn't know what to do. If my mom wasn't laughing, then my dad was harsh on me.
Yeah.
But once my mom was laughing, he was like, dang it, because he always deferred to her. Mm. And so she'd start laughing. And then the siblings would start laughing. And I loved it. And up at a certain point, my dad was okay with it. And then there was a moment where he didn't like that. And I remember being confronted with some strong resistance and not knowing what to do about that, and realizing that part doesn't work well here. And then that having been repeated over and over again up until my teens, I remember thinking I have to change how I am because it's not working. And it's extremely painful, and I'm not getting it. I can't run from this one. Like I could, there's a lot of things I could run from. I couldn't run from that. So I did start trying to change and behave differently, get more serious, because that was more accepted, Yeah. Trying to be more thoughtful and intellectual, and I was a terrible student. So there was a lot against me in that world. So I think that I did that. And then when I was in ministry, there was a lot of that again and this is the thing, I've talked with the other 7s about this, and they resonate a lot with it. Because we're not born in a box, no type is, right? But 7s are really outside of the box in their minds. Like, they don't think in terms of sort of structures or rules or boundary lines. And so I would cross social boundary lines that I didn't know existed, but it seemed like everybody else around me did. So I would say something, and it was like, all of a sudden there was silence in the room. And it wasn't not like anything stupid. It was just, I was a pastor at the time even. Just say something like, well, have we ever thought about this? And I would see the room go silent. And everybody would defer to the leader, and the leader would go, so well, let's move on. And I was like, did I just say something wrong? And so that was repeated since I was a kid. So I started realizing I don't intuit certain things that are apparently inside of a system, and I'm thinking outside of the system. And so I would try to constrain myself from speaking up more, so I might go silent, right? But it's still very much within the range of the pattern of the 7, and I could see that, how I was just trying to survive in that world. And like you said, it was very much of that, like, this is so painful. The first few times I had that experience, so painful that my reaction was all over the place. It was messy reactions. They weren't like, well, let me sit down and develop a new strategy. It was like, that didn't work. Okay, go extreme to the other side, and then another extreme to another side. And like even the whole thing of consumption as a 7, like we're, very gluttonous types with life. Like it's like, oh, life is a buffet. Let's consume. It's like, well, that's not allowed in certain worlds. And so what did I do? Sneaky consumption. So I converted my consumption to something else. So it didn't look like that. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, how I tried to adapt it, but still very much the pattern of trying to feel satiated as a 7 and always finding myself still hungry, which is consistent with a lot of 7s. So, yeah.
Yeah.
How were you meeting your need at the time versus how you feel like you're meeting it now?
Well, there was even more running. It's hard to say some things because I don't want to expose certain people, which is why I'm being a little cryptic here. There were points where I knew I couldn't meet the need at all. Like it got to a point where it was like, there's no way I can meet the need because of the sort of forced isolation that I was put into. Okay, so that's all I'll say about that. Mm-hmm. And that caused a lot of anxiety, which, was very, very painful. But I would manage through my imagination, escaping to my imagination as whenever I could get out of that world. It was diving deep into, deep into relational connections with people. Not at the emotional level, but at this, we're going to have fun. We're going to be together. And like really losing myself in another person or, a series of people that I had made connections with. I mean, it was, romantic or, best friend kind of thing or, play buddy, we're going to play, we're going to do this. And my imagination would take me into as a poor family with hardly anything, somehow I still managed to come up with creating toys, creating stuff, I made a Chinese star. Like I think back and I think, how did I come up with this stuff? Well, when you're a 7 and you're pigeonholed from all sides because of your environment and you're dying, that's the only way you can survive. So I found, these old blades from tile knives that had holes in the center of these blades. And I'm like, there it is. I can create a Chinese star. So I would take 3 of them, found a bolt and a nut, and in the middle, I tightened them up. And there it is. There's my Chinese star. And I'm throwing this thing in the backyard, and I'm super excited about it. Made harpoons out of straws and needles with string. I mean, everything I could to find a way to entertain myself, to entertain my brother, my sister, and to keep that sort of we're having fun despite the fact that this is not fun. Mm-hmm. And I did that growing up. And in the church world, I figured out, just burying myself in new ideas, new endeavors, right? Because those were at least somewhat acceptable, even though eventually it burned out a lot of people around me. It was like, well, let's do something new. Let's change it up. Let's mix it up.
So how do you think you fulfill that neutral need now?
I've transcended now, so I have no need. I think I'm aware more, but I think the pattern has shifted more into recognizing that the appetite will always be there. It's not going to go away.
Correct.
I think having people around me and being open about that has been helpful so that when I'm not aware, because I don't think awareness is something you can practice alone. I think awareness is something you practice in community. Because there'll be people who will reflect things back to you. And they do so in gentle ways. Like you guys do it in very gentle ways with me. And that will, There it is. Yeah, I do see that. Thank you. It's like, and I don't always like it, but I can go, yeah, all right, I see what's happening there. I think on the high side, I get to create an optimal future. I get to.
For multiple people.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's no longer serving the ego alone.
Right.
Right? So I didn't say it's no longer serving the ego. It's not serving the ego alone.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, the ego still gets its needs. There's still the ego. It's the protective structure of like, I don't want to be without, right? That's what it's there for. But that's always going to be there, but it's less so, and it's less so. And I learn ways of moving more towards the high side, which is the gift that's there to give to the world. So I try to live more from that, always aware that I'm never going to get there entirely. I can tell you day to day, I can tell you all the ways that I fall short of that. It's, but I don't shame myself around it because shame doesn't change anything. Mm-hmm. I just sort of smile at it and okay, there you are again.
Because in this context, I get to feel good with the people I'm serving. I'm not taking something from them in order to feel good.
That's the difference.
It's a huge
difference. It's a shared experience. Absolutely. And I think that's us, all of us at our best, is when we're in the place like you're succeeding, but now you're bringing hope to the world. And you're like, you can also succeed and you can also achieve. And I don't always have to be on stage as a 3, right? Right. It is beautiful when we're doing that.
It is beautiful indeed. Well, thank you so much to everyone for listening to us today. And it's good when we have the ability to share our own experience and growth around some of these things, because we are right with you doing our own work alongside of all of you. So make sure you are subscribed to catch this whole season. And if you follow us on Instagram at Art of Growth, there's some other content there as well. Remember to reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org with any questions or if you're interested in coaching. And that's about it for this week. So, my friends, may you remember the times when you need to get back to the basics, back to the essence, to take a look again at what is going on and reorient yourself with where you are and where you're headed, what is deeply true and will always be true of you, and the context you need to surround yourself with to let that thrive and let your unique light shine. Grace and growth, my friends.